So, doing the 1980s oral assignment about Bernie Goetz. My mother. Okay. So, how old were you and where were you living during the timeline of this event, including the actual shooting through the trial, the main trial, which is 1984 through 1987?
So I would have been, I think it was the summer of 84. Did it happen in the summer?
It happened in December.
December. So that was my next guess. I said maybe it was December. So in 1984, I was 18 years old.
Okay. So then 19 and 20.
Yes.
So, and where were you living?
I was living in my parents' home in Emerson, New Jersey, which is, Bergen County is North Jersey and is 10 miles outside of New York City.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question. Did the high crime rate in New York during the 80s ever have an impact on where you live? Not an impact on where you lived as in the decision on where you chose to live, but the impact on where you lived as, like, it affected.
No, there was no spillover because we were in New Jersey. So, we're a suburb of New York, but it's New Jersey. So there's no particular impact in terms of crime. But we were all very aware of the crime rate in New York because we went in there frequently.
Yeah, okay. So, kind of a big question. What is your view on the whole situation? That is, do you believe Bernie Goetz's decision to shoot those teenage boys was justified or not?
Well, it's a complicated one. It was complicated by a couple of factors, not the least of which is the weapon, I think, was not registered. But honestly, in New York, in that time period, you were foolish, very foolish, especially at night, to go around without having some kind of protection. As a teen, we generally tried to either stay there in groups during the day or, you carried mace or pepper spray. So the general feel was, and at 18, I think I kind of felt this way too, is that he had taken a stand for his own protection. The problem is, of course, he kept shooting. But definitely the sympathy of the people lay with Bernie Goetz. I do think, especially as a more mature adult now, that he lost control and he went too far.
Right.
But I had friends in college who got mugged in New York.
Oh,
you went
really?
into New York? Oh, yeah, absolutely. You went into New York. You didn't people.
So,
get
I
mugged.
knew it was a common thing.
Oh,
But
no,
it was common.
very common. Very
Okay.
common. Often what happened is you'd get mugged at knife point rather than say gun point.
Yeah.
But you just handed over your wallet and you kept going. For example, I always carried, as a teenager going to the city in high school and in college, I always carried a $10 bill cash in my shoe so that if I was mugged, I could buy my train ticket home.
Right.
But you just kind of,
Okay.
you carried your purse, you always wore a crossbody strapped purse. You carried it close to your body, and you did that so you didn't get mugged. The other thing they do was a snatch and run. Purse snatching was very common.
All right. So, based on all of that you just told me, so does all of that information based on your experience, would that make you more inclined to believe he was justified?
Oh, he was absolutely justified.
Okay.
Absolutely justified. He didn't need to keep shooting them.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. So, sort of on a similar note, now that we've established that you believe he was justified in his actions in the, I assume, the self-protection, self-defense way.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you believe that his actions were racially motivated at all?
Nope.
So, you don't believe that, you believe that if it was 4 white teenagers, he would have had the same reaction?
Well, okay. I don't think he shot them because they were black.
Yeah, but do you think the fact that they were black played into how violent it was?
I think the fact that they were black and how they were dressed made him view them as what we would call hoods, which had nothing particular to do with race, but just, short for hoodlums, which, which just meant tough city kids. And in New Jersey, hoodlums were predominantly white. But, in other words, that he viewed them as criminals who were targeting him.
Okay.
And their race probably played into that perception of them. But I don't think he was like, oh, here's some black kids, let me shoot them.
Yeah. So do you think if it was like a bunch of white preppy kids, he would kind of just
Okay,
like,
if they were white and preppy, he probably would have viewed it maybe as more of a case of aggressive panhandling, which was very common. Same
Yes.
as if they had appeared homeless. But they were young teenagers, I think they were wearing their hoodies.
Yeah.
And this was a real common demographic, or at least the perception was that, of who was going to mug you.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the rather shocking, well, not even shocking, the most noted things about this case is that when he, turned himself in, everyone was kind of celebrating him calling him the subway vigilante.
Subway vigilante, yep.
And so, based on that, do you believe that the people, do you think the people of New York made any mistakes during this time, if any at all, in regards to how they reacted?
Okay,
to
well,
it?
I will say this, that the media has always and continues to, especially New York, overplay sensational news stories. The New York Post was famous for their 3-inch headlines and their sensational headlines. So the fact that he immediately got labeled the subway vigilante and that he was really the everyman hero
Yeah.
is pretty typical of New York. Also, I mean, they would do man on the street interviews, and almost without exception, I mean, people just were like, it's about time, because at that time the government in New York was not very responsive. The mayor was not getting it done, which is why when they finally did clean up the crime in New York, I mean, it was a big deal. The crime rate was so high. It was so dangerous to go in. I mean, I had been aggressively panhandled as a young woman. Oh, not mugged, aggressively panhandled. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Had a man demand my change when I bought my ticket and was not backing off me. And we're right there, daylight, public.
Did you give it to him?
No. But I had a real concern that he was going to hurt me.
Yeah, understandable. Okay, so this kind of similar. You kind of already answered it in this response, but can you explain the reaction of the New York people in terms of your own experience of living during this time?
Sure. So when you went into New York, and I'm sure I didn't live in New York, but I lived close by.
Yeah.
It was, truly, you never knew when there was going to be a crime, especially on the subways. It was not uncommon for it to happen on the subways, and then they jump off the subway just as soon as right before the doors closed, and then you were out of luck. And it was, you never got on a subway car alone. You never got on, it was just you and another person.
Yeah.
You walked until you found the crowded car.
Yeah, I believe that he was alone.
Yeah, so that would have been considered a very dangerous situation for him to be in. And people were fed up with it. They were fed up with it. They were fed up with the fact that that just couldn't do anything to, the government was not able to curb it at all. And the police force was not able to curb it. And when he did it, he was hailed as a hero because he had just said enough. The famous line from, there was a TV show, a movie then, I think it was a movie, called Network.
Yeah.
And it had a famous line that the commercials played over and over again. There's a man in the city, I think it's New York City, he flings open his window and he shouts, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." And then all over the city, people start opening up their windows and shouting that out. And that was really kind of the zeitgeist at the time. People were mad as hell, they didn't want to take it anymore, and he didn't, and they were like, that way to go, Bernie.
I see. All right, so that photo I showed you before, you started driving with the young men, with the politicians should try riding the trains before calling people vigilantes. What do you believe, though, that those young men are trying to convey in this photo?
So that, as I noticed by their T-shirts and by their berets, those two young men were members of the Guardian Angels, and the Guardian Angels were what was at the time called a vigilante group. Today we'd probably call it a citizens action grassroots group. It was founded by a man named Curtis Lewa, again, tired of being victims of crime. The Guardian Angels patrolled the subways. They were not armed. I think they might have had batons or whatever. They had no legal authority. But when they saw things happening, they came to the defense of the victim. And so that was what they did. And they seemed to, I can't recall exactly what the particulars were with them, but they kind of brushed up against the authorities quite a bit. But their whole attitude was, look, if you're not going to protect the people, we will.
Yeah, so what do you think they were trying to say when they said they should try riding the subways before
because politicians did not ride the subways. They had drivers.
Oh, I
see. They had drivers. They got driven safely places. Okay. They were not sitting on the subways. They were not watching, crimes happen in front of them. They were not, it was, no, it wasn't in the 80s. I think it was in the 70s. It might have been the 60s. But there was a famous case of a woman who was mugged and murdered on the street. And as it turned out, there was something like 20 different people heard her screaming for help.
Oh, we learned about that in this class.
Heard her dying cries, and no one called 911.
Yeah.
Because no one wanted to be involved. Everyone was afraid that they'd be targeted next.
Yeah.
So, there's a real undercurrent of fear, and the Guardian Angels tried to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And so, they were like, if you're going to sit there and you're safe, the mayor has Gracie Manor, and it's, gated, and, it's nice and safe. They have their bodyguards, they have their cars, and they're not the average person walking the streets at night and having to ride the subway, and it was dangerous.
Alright, so, do you believe, why do you believe that Getz was so violent in his shooting? And I'm paraphrasing when I say this, but when he essentially said, I only stopped shooting them because they ran out of bullets. So what do you think kind of pushed him to that edge?
Well, one, he'd been a victim of crime already.
Yeah.
So, I suspect today you'd probably diagnose him with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, probably.
That as soon as he was approached again, he had decided he was going to keep himself safe. He'd armed himself, and as soon as he was approached, that was it. He went into survival mode, and then, quite frankly, I think it's, it was just anger overtook him.
Yeah.
You know how much Criminal Minds I watched. It was a classic case of overkill, But he just, he said to one of the boys that he had, boys, but the young men, one of them, when he shot them, he said, as he lay writhing on the ground, he said, you don't look like you're suffering enough, and shot him again. So so there was that. Well, that part was kind of messed up, but I'm done. Even that part, people got a sort of perverse pleasure out of, because they were like, "Yeah, how do you like it?"
Yeah.
That you're not lying. People would be, knifed and left dying, bleeding out on the ground, and so all of that anger just got funneled towards these particular young men, and Bernie Getz was definitely seen as a hero.
Okay.
And I don't think he saw himself that way.
In the time that this all happened, it was hitting the news and everything. So what did you think was going to happen to Getz as the result of the trial and everything versus what actually happened?
I don't think there was a doubt in anyone's mind that there was not a single New Yorker that would convict him.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you found out that he actually was not found guilty of murder and assault...
I think people would have been up in arms if he was convicted.
Oh, yeah.
Up in arms.
Okay.
Because, again, although there's certainly a good claim for it, he went overboard, but he was also being targeted, and he was the victim, and maybe it was more than he needed to do. No, it was definitely more than he needed to do. I don't think there's a particular law for citizens that says, proportionate force.
Really?
I don't think so. I don't know if there is or there wasn't. Pretty much, there's a general doctrine out there.
So do you think...
The Castle Doctrine, that as soon as someone steps foot onto your property and you're threatened, you are at full liberty to do whatever you feel you need to do to defend yourself.
So, kind of going off of that, this is a offhanded question. I don't even think that's the word I'm looking for. But, so, assuming he only shot them, once, would that have, do you think he still would have gotten all that fame? And
Yes.
everything?
Well, here's the thing. You have to realize he was far outnumbered. Were there 4 of them or 5 of them?
4 of them.
4. So it was 4 men to 1. Now, Bernie Goetz, if you've seen a picture of him, was the classic, what they would have called 90-pound weakling.
Yeah.
He was small, he
Yes.
was mousy, he was weak.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could have been 4 preppy 8-year-olds. He was outnumbered.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
so he had to shoot his way around.
Exactly. All right. Okay, so last question is kind of a big one.
Okay.
So, how do you believe that this event as a whole, including the shooting, the trial, everything, how do you think it shaped the way you see many of the issues that were involved in it, such as crime, racism, and gun possession?
Well, I think that it was long enough ago that you don't really hear too many people invoking, well, Bernie Goetz was armed, and New York has very, very tight gun control laws, but they're also very, very tight and hard on crime now, which they didn't used to be.
Really? Yeah, obviously, of course they were.
And the streets have, they say that the streets really got cleaned up, and they're much, 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 much safer than they were at the time.
I've never felt particularly unsafe walking through New York. Granted, I was with my entire family, but you know.
I mean, yeah, I never did either when I was with my family, but like I said, I used to go with my friends. And we didn't ride the subways so much, but... And actually, that was part of the reason why we didn't.
Yeah.
It was not safe. You walked.
So let me rephrase. Do you think did it shape the way you see crime, racism, and gun possession at all? Thinking
So
back
look,
on it now,
everything shapes something. I mean,
True.
it was certainly a seminal event. You can't say it didn't shape things.
Yeah.
So I think one of the issues that you brought up, and I think probably does shape it, is very much an issue of today, especially with Black Lives Matter, which is the perception that there's a higher crime rate amongst the black community, and so there is, especially among the white community, a greater sense of fear, and a good deal of that is perception, and so there's a greater sense of threat. Say when you see a lot of times when a white person sees a black person as opposed to when they see another white person.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that issue isn't necessarily formed by that, but like you can see kind of the seeds of it in there. Like it's still an issue today, right?
Yeah.
It's still an issue today.
I'm sure there's plenty of like police brutality issues where they did more than they had to. That could be
right. Well, then proportionate force amongst the police.
Exactly.
You talk about with the police with proportionate force. There's been more important items of news with that, more recent ones, because this, of course, did not involve the police, but a citizen.
Yeah.
What's really important about Bernie Goetz, it was your average citizen who defended himself. And he was seen as a hero because it was 4 against 1. I mean, it was all of the things. So, what other issues were talking about? Gun control.
Yeah.
I don't know what the gun control laws were at the time. And again, I was 18, so I was an adult, but I was a young adult. I was off to college. So, I remember when it happened. I was, it was big news. And I didn't follow it closely, but I mean, you couldn't not follow it.
Yeah.
And people talked about it. It was talked about a lot.
Right.
So, I think it, to some extent, when I think about that, when I think about gun control, it kind of highlights to me some of the issues I have, which is that people who want to have guns are going to get guns. He did not have a legally owned weapon.
That's true. He did not. That's actually what he got charged on.
Right, and that's what he felt that he needed to be safe, and as it turns out, he did. So there's a lot of complex issues there. On the other hand, he had an illegal weapon, and look what happened.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if he didn't have that, what would have happened? We don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they would have hit him up for his wallet, and maybe they would have grabbed his wallet and run.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things, crime could be done at that time just by that kind of aggressive behavior, because there'd be an assumption that there was a weapon, or fear there was a
Exactly.
weapon. They'd have their hoods up, hands in pockets. You didn't know what they
Exactly.
had.
Okay.
Or they would just say they had a weapon. Okay?
Thank you.
You're
for
very welcome.
Taking the time to discuss this with me.
It was a big news event. It's in We Didn't Start the Fire, in fact.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.